Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are going through Matthew, and we're in the 27th chapter as Jesus faces Pontius Pilate. He's been handed over by the Jews. He's been telling his disciples that's what happened. Peter's already denied him to his horror, right? And um, and now he's going to face Pilate. Now, uh, we have to understand the reason why Jesus had to face Pilate is because the Jews, by law, by Roman law, um, could not execute, and that kind of gives you the insight of the politics of the day. Rome, and even if you kind of go back, let me do this. Let me find this. I can illustrate this a lot better here. This picture, prophetic picture. If you go to Daniel chapter 2, God gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream, and Daniel the prophet interprets this dream, and excuse me, he interprets this dream, which revealed what King Nebuchadnezzar saw in the dream was a human form representing five world dominating kingdoms. That these kings would rule the earth. Um, so beginning with Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, and then the chest of arms and silver was the Medes and the Persians. The belly of thighs and bronze was the Grecian kingdom, and the legs of iron was the Roman kingdom. So ever since Babylon, um, the Jews have been under all five of these kingdoms, right? Um, Under rulership of all these kingdoms. Okay. In other words, since that time, they've never ever been really, you can say, a freestanding. And even though Israel today is a freestanding kingdom, or it's a nation, I should say, they exist. They don't. They are a fraction of what they once were, and they exist because of the aid of the Allies. So in other words, um, if you um, um, I don't want to get too deep into that, but let me kind of go back to you why I'm bringing this up right here. The legs of iron and clay, the legs of iron and clay. Um, I'm sorry, the legs of iron is where they are at this point with the Roman Empire. That is the prophetic vision. And I wanted to make that point. And ever since the previous three kingdoms, so Israel, in a sense, has been lorded over by Babylon, the Medes and Persians, Grecian kingdoms, and now Rome. Okay, so let's go to so um, under Rome, they enjoyed kind of freedom. Okay, as long as they stay in line. Okay, so long as and that was the Pharisees, that was Herod's kind of job to keep the people in line. As long as they did that, Rome said, "Okay, you're still under our rule," but they even let them have their religion. They were irritated by the Jewish religion. That okay, so but they could not execute. So even though they had enjoyed freedom, there is still um, hmm, there is still okay. Here we go. There is still Okay, let me go back. They. All right, here we go. I'm trying to get my way here. Okay, even though they enjoyed their freedoms, it was still restricted. So one of these restrictions was they could not execute. So now this is why Jesus is standing before the governor. All right, so let's look at verse 11. It says, now Jesus stood before the governor. He says, and are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. Now, right here is a treasonable offense. And remember, people have been saying this ever since his birth. Remember, the wise men came and says, where is the king of the Jews, the one born king of the Jews? And this was a big no-no with Rome. And so had Jesus flat out said yes, then yeah, he would have had reason to execute him. So Jesus answered, you have said it. Now this was kind of a backhanded way of saying yes, but he said, but you have said it. And verse 12 says, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and the elders, he didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, don't you hear how much they are testifying against you? But he didn't answer him on even one charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, by the way, you should learn from this in our culture. In other words, shut up. Keep your mouth shut. Now, not for the reasons that Jesus is doing it, but just from the that the more you talk, the more you get yourself in trouble. So people should not talk to the police. Okay. Do not answer their questions. Okay. They do not mean you good. Now, Jesus did not answer them. By the way, all Jesus would have had to do was to say, they have no case. And as we're going to see, Pilate is trying to let him go, because at this point, he's like, there's no reason to hold him. And if Jesus is not saying anything, now it's up to the Pharisees, it's up to his accusers to make their case. And they're doing a bad try. None of their witnesses agree. Now, verse 15 says, at the festival, the governor's custom was to release to the crowd a prisoner they wanted. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered together, Pilate said to him, whom is it that you wanted to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Messiah? For he knew they had handed him over because of envy. Now, Pilate, by the way, is in a very precarious political situation. History tells us he was already kind of in trouble. So he didn't need this headache right here, this trial. He didn't need this. And so very interesting choice though. Who do you want me to leave? And some people think that the reason why Pilate even offered Barabbas was because this would have been such a preposterous choice. They would have had to choose Jesus. Right? I mean, and if I may, think about our political climate today. Just think about that. I'm tempted, but I'm not going to indulge. But just think about our political climate today, and you think about who, as those that call themselves Christians, who they are choosing. Okay, so Pilate says, hey, you want Barabbas? You know, the murderer? Verse 19, while he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with this righteous man, for today I've suffered terribly in a dream because of him. And what is amazing is that he's constantly getting testimony, right? That Jesus is innocent. One, false testimony. He knows this trial is a sham. His wife says he's innocent. He can look by what they are bringing, that they cannot prove one single charge. Verse 20, the chief priests and the elders, however, persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to execute Jesus. Now you should know that this very crowd heard Jesus. They heard him. They heard him teach. They saw his miracles. Some of them received healings. Some of them were present when he fed the 5,000, the 4,000. And yet, notice he's saying that the crowd is crying out for a murderer. The crowd is crying out for a murderer. And then if you were to ask the crowd, why are you supporting the murderer over Jesus? I am so tempted to delve into our current political but anyway, so because the parallels are striking here. All right, so but notice if you ask the crowd, why are you choosing why are you choosing a murderer over a good man that you know to be a good man? Verse 21, the governor asked him, which of the two do you want me to release for you? Barabbas, they answered. Pilate asked them, what should I do with Jesus, who was called Messiah? They all answered, crucify him. Then he said, why? What has he done wrong? Now, this is kind of classic with people on all levels. Where you present a case and you go, well, why? And notice how they do this. But they kept shouting, crucify him all the more. This is called deflection, dodging. Okay, why? Because if they say, well, he did nothing, then you have to ask, well, then why do you want him crucified? And especially even the crowd. We know why the Pharisees wanted him crucified, but why do you all want him crucified? The crowd. What wrong has he done? Not one single person could ever answer truthfully why they wanted Jesus to be crucified. Shows you how fickle, by the way, the public is. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and he said, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And all of the people answered, his blood be on us and on our children. Now, a lot of people today, especially the Jews, they hate this line right here. They do. They hate this line when the Jews, and notice again, Pilate saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. Now, in reality, Pilate, you weren't. But again, his motivations was he didn't need the political headache. And notice, as the people were shouting more, he didn't need that. So then verse 26, then he released Barabbas to them after having Jesus flogged and handing him over to be crucified. Now, how lucky was Barabbas? Right? Barabbas was like, I'm getting set free. Wow, Verse 27, then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the headquarters and gathered the whole company around him. They stripped him and dressed him in a scarlet military robe. They twisted together a crown of thorn, put it on his head, and placed a reed in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him, Hail, King of the Jews. Then they spit on him. Took a reed and kept hitting him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. So, again, you see what is so sad here, how dark the people are. Now, they're mocking Jesus, obviously. The crown, the twisted, the thorns were his crown, right? And then he had his reed. Nothing grandeur about this. It was a mock. Totally mocking him. Then he says, and as they were going out, they found a Cyrenian man named Simon and they forced him to carry his cross. Now, this was the Roman law. You could do that if you had a burden or a load that you could have someone carry, and they would carry up to a mile. And if you remember when Jesus in the mount, in the Beatitude, the Mount Sermon on the Mount, he said, if someone compel you to go 1 mile, he says go 2. Okay, so that gesture right there. But by law, you could be forced to help up to a mile. It says, and when they came to the place called Golgotha, which means gall place, they gave him wine mixed with gall to drink. But when he had tasted it, he did not drink. He would not drink. Now, this was sort of a drug to deaden the pain, because it was excruciating. Thus far, he was whipped, he was beaten, and so it said they forced this man to carry the cross. When they came to the place of Golgotha, which means gall place, they gave him wine mixed with gall to drink, but when he tasted it, he would not drink. In other words, Jesus took the full force of the suffering here, the full force. Verse 3, after crucifying him, they divided his clothes by casting lots. By the way, this was also prophesied. And then they sat down, and then they sat down and were guarding him, and above his head they put up the charges against him in writing, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. So this is what his charge was. This is what his crime was. Now, when they would crucify, again, the Roman crucifixion were the most brutal and most cruel in history. And what they would do is they would post the charges. So you're going to see, he's a thief, he's a murderer. In other words, Barabbas should have been here, but he's the murderer. And of course, insurrectionists would even be worse to the Romans. So he says, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And by the way, crucifixions were not uncommon. A couple of hundred years before this time, there was a great slave revolt that was eventually crushed by Rome. Sometimes you see that there was a TV show called Gladiators. But then they crucified literally hundreds of the people that caused insurrection. In other words, the roads were just lined with people on the cross. So this was something common to them, but it was the most painful, brutal, cruel, painful way to die. They would take your hand, and of course, when you see all of the silly pictures where they would put the hands, that you see the nails right here. No, the nails were, you can almost say, mini spikes, and they would nail them right here at the wrist in the bone. Okay, now remember, Jesus was also scourged or ripped, and that was painful because under Jewish law, you can only give 40 stripes. And that's why a lot of times they would give 39 just to be careful that they didn't go over. Well, Romans didn't have that rule. And sometimes they would use what was called a cat-o'-nine strip tail. It was 3. And it was embedded in the leather was bits of bones or metal. And so actually when they was hitting you, you were getting 3 stripes. And they hit you as many times as they want. And oftentimes your back would be lacerated. I'll read this just more before I quit. Verse 38 says, then 2 criminals were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, the one who would demolish the sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. Now, this phrase you will find in John's Gospel, chapter 2. And by the way, this was one of the statements that they would use to say he blasphemes, right? Because Jesus said in John chapter 3, if he destroyed his temple, and he was talking about his body, I will rear it up in 3 days. But they meant it to be, they took it to be the temple itself. Then he said, if you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests with the scribes and the elders mocked him and said, he saves others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. They're lying liars. He has put his trust in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am God's son. In the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him kept taunting him. Now, it's sad for the people. Now, there were people mocking him. Then the chief priest starts mocking him. But again, one of the most interesting things here about this statement here. Where is it? Okay, I can't find it here. But this statement here, he saves others, is found in the Psalms. I don't know why I just don't have it. Anyway, it's found in the Psalms. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you are a Pharisee, knowing the scripture, you're actually fulfilling prophecy in a bad way for you. But you're actually fulfilling prophecy. And they had to know that, because I would think that as they're saying this, right? He saves others, but he cannot save himself. He's the King of Israel. This is actual prophecy. I'm gonna find it by the next study. But no, they would have had to, like, you would have thought they would have been given pause and go, wait a minute, I'm actually quoting prophecy, thus condemning myself. In other words, God said this would happen. The psalmist prophesied that this was prophecy. They knew this to be prophecy. And you would think they would have had to, as they're quoting this, oh, snaps. He's talking about me. But yet, as Jesus said in the other gospel, this is one of the darkest times. The darkest times here. Okay. And so at this moment, the very, very dark time. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to pick it up. All right. I'll come back to this next study. So let's see. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I do mean that all comments are welcome. So I will see you in the next study.